You were right. You said millions could die, millions have died, could be as many as 10 million. We're a quarter of our way there globally right now. Give us a sense of what you think COVID-19 has done to this country and to the world so far.
God, I wish I had been wrong. Uh, I think it's so far probably the most significant event of the 21st century. I think we're getting towards the end of it in its acute phase, at least in the industrial world, but it's going to cast a big shadow forward. And I think the ultimate historical significance here is going to be that Asia basically managed this successfully, and the West basically managed this unsuccessfully. Beyond that, David, I think it's accelerated the trends that were either concerning us or exciting us before it happened. We're all going to be working with much more IT in our lives much sooner than we envisioned. Most of us thought of Zoom as having to do with how fast you were going a year and a half ago. That's not the first association any of us have with the word Zoom today. It's going to change how we work. It has been, like so many things, much more painful for those with less education and for those in the lower part of the income distribution than for those who are fortunate. I think it's also going to change geography. I was very worried for a variety of reasons about the prospects for New York City. I am much more concerned today after the catalyst to exit that COVID represented. So I suspect that when people write histories of the 21st century, whether those are geopolitical histories, whether those are economic histories, whether those are social histories of how people live, there's a real chance that this will be remembered as a hinge point.
With respect to the comparison between the United States and Asia, particularly China, let me take that. Before the pandemic happened, there was an economic race on, and China was clearly catching up, was going to surpass at some point. Does this permanently change the shape of that race? I mean, I guess I'm asking, can we catch back up?
Look, I think it is right for us to be very focused and very concerned about our competition with China in economics and in technology. But it is wrong to make absolute statements. The predictions in, for example, my uncle Paul Samuelson's textbook in 1960, that Russia would overtake the United States by 1980, look foolish in retrospect. Much of what was said in the late 80s and early 90s about the emerging Japanese power looks foolish in retrospect. So can the United States still be an economic superpower? Will we be able to compete with China? Yes. Are the magnitude of the challenges our system faces greater today than they were a decade ago? Absolutely. Are they greater than we expected they would be a decade ago? Absolutely. Do they require us to innovate in technology, innovate in education, innovate in infrastructure? Look, that's part of why I'm so concerned about a budget strategy that's mostly based around writing checks to people. That is not building our capacity to compete with China.
Well, let's talk about building that capacity in an area you know terribly well. You just mentioned it, education. Clearly, education, whether it's higher education or grade school education, has really been hit hard by this pandemic. It has not recovered, far from it so far. How do you assess the loss that we're taking right now in educating our young people?
Look, as best we can tell, when you lose a year of education early in life, you get some of it back, but you don't get all of it back. And so the scar that is being placed on millions of children who really didn't get much schooling this year is not a scar that's ever completely going to heal. The president is absolutely right about the importance of getting people back to school safely. That is about vaccinating. That is about testing. That is about having appropriate infrastructures. And I yield to no one in the importance I attach to doing this safely. But I have to say that entrenched, and I'll say it, teacher union interests that have resisted going back to school have really been putting their own material benefit ahead of the interests of their kids. And that is not the best tradition of the teaching profession. Some cases, they're absolutely right to be focused on what's necessary before we move forward. But I'd sure like to see a much more collaborative spirit between teachers and school districts to get people back to school. I think the success we've had in higher education, David, in some ways, my class this year by Zoom was better than it had been with me in person because there was editing. There was the opportunity to bring in people from all over the world to speak to my class. I think America needs to launch a major initiative to bring what's in our universities, which is one of our great sources of national strength, to the entire world. And I hope that will be a continuing legacy for President Biden.
So Larry, let me wrap this up by trying to find a happy note. When I practiced law, we had this saying, when you're writing a difficult brief, if you can't fix it, then feature it. Is there a way to feature some of the difficulties we've had? And that is to say, to recognize the fact there has been a failure of competency, as you've talked about repeatedly, on the part of our government, failure in various aspects, and to be something of a wake-up call, a clarion wake-up call that actually could help us turn around some things that, let's be honest, needed to be turned around long before the pandemic.
I think we've got some examples. Look, what we've done with vaccines in terms of producing them and developing this fast is a miraculous tribute to the combination of science, intellectual leadership, and powerful companies and markets. And that gives us something to build on. I think we've had a wake-up call that you need civil, expert, serious, thoughtful people leading a society rather than what we had before. And while I've got some disagreements on nuances of economic policy with President Biden's team, isn't it remarkable that we're talking about the optimal size of stimulus packages rather than talking about possible impeachable offenses by the president?